It's the stuff of nightmares. When Rachel Bloor from Sydney, Australia, woke up in the middle of the night, she felt a heavy weight curled up in her chest. Half asleep, she reached out her hand expecting to find her pet dog. But instead she found herself petting a smooth, slithering object. As she pulled the bed covers up to her neck, her husband switched on the bedside lamp to reveal this 2.5 meter long python. Her husband quickly jumped up and got the dogs out of the bedroom. I think they were afraid that if the dogs and the snake got together, that would not be pleasant. As Rachel kind of shimmied out under the covers, hardly believing what was happening. Now, she had been around snakes before, so she recognised that that carpet python, which is non-venomous. So she managed to stay calm, which she says is more than can be said for her husband, who didn't remain quite so calm. But this snake had crawled in through the window. And it was so long that part of it was still hanging out the window. So incredibly, she calmly began feeding the snake back out of the way that it came. And then thankfully all animals and humans escaped unharmed. Not a pleasant way to wake up in the middle of the night. Now Daniel, he didn't wake up to find a monster on top of him in his bed. Instead, he saw 4 monsters when he was dreaming. And that may not sound so bad because with nightmares we know, well, they're not real, and so we can wake up and shake them off. But for Daniel, his vision was a vision from God of something very real and very troubling. But there was also a message of hope here and a message of comfort, because this dream also promised that God is still on the throne. So we're going to read from Daniel chapter 7. We're going to read verse 1 through to verse 14, and Paul is going to come and he's going to read for us this morning. Thank you, Paul.
Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back legs it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch, because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
Thank you very much, Paul. A few months ago, if you were with us, we saw how Daniel, this book, was written in two different languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. So the first and the last section were written in Hebrew, and that middle section from chapter 2 to verse 4, chapter 2 verse 4 to chapter 7, they are written in Aramaic. And they are structured in a very special way. It's called an chiasm. So chapter 4 and 5, if you remember, that describes a challenge to the pride of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. So that's kind of the center, the focus of this chiasm. And then in contrast, on either side of those chapters, chapters 3 and 6, they talk about the faithfulness of God's people, of the three friends, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, in the fiery furnace. And then in Daniel, as we looked at last week, in the lion's den. But then this section, chapter 2 and 7, starts with and ends with a dream. So chapter 2, we saw Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember the huge statue of all different types of metals that was destroyed by a rock that became a mountain? Well, that dream was about how this was a prophecy. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that this was a prophecy that described the next 4 great world empires that would rise in that area, and that would be ultimately destroyed by the coming of God's kingdom. And our chapter 7, parallels that. So we have another dream. Verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. A dream that gives us more details about these 4 coming kingdoms. And we know this because despite this being apocalyptic literature, with its weird and scary and head-scratching imagery, the passage tells us what the simple message of it was. That's because when Daniel saw this dream, like many of us when we read it for the first time, he was troubled in spirit. And the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me, he said. He didn't know what it was, but it really was very disturbing to him. And so in the second half of this chapter, he asked someone, says someone who was standing there in his dream, he asked someone what it meant. He asked what it was all about. He asked them to explain the meaning of that dream that we just read together. And this is what this man told him. Verse 17. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. The 4 beasts represent 4 great kingdoms. And these kingdoms match the 4 kingdoms represented by Nebuchadnezzar's dream of that statue. But this time they're described as beasts, to emphasize the fact that those empires, they will be violent, they will be dangerous, they'll be frightening. So let's just go through them very briefly. Verse 4. The first was like a lion, and it had wings like an eagle. This represents Babylon, the head of gold in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, if you remember that one. Symbolizes both the strength and speed of that kingdom. But Daniel, as he saw this lion with its wings, he saw that this kingdom was going to be humbled. His wings were torn off, it says, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And many people think that refers to, remember how Nebuchadnezzar, this proud king, was humbled by the Lord And yet he was restored when he humbled his heart before the Lord. Then we have the second beast. That looked like a bear. This probably represents the Medes and the Persians, the kingdom that came after Nebuchadnezzar, after Belshazzar. The one who conquered Babylon about 14 years after this dream, when Daniel had this dream. This bear was raised up on one of its sides, which I think refers to the fact that the Persians were stronger than the Medes. It was the Medes and the Persians, but the Persians were the dominant force in that empire. And it was fierce, and it was destructive, because it was told to get up and eat your fill of flesh. Then we have the third beast. It looked like a leopard. It had 4 wings and 4 heads, which maybe some people think shows how it could move in all directions very quickly. And this represents Greece. Many of you know about Greece, about Alexander the Great. You've heard about him, I'm sure. Maybe seen a movie about him. And we'll see more details about Alexander the Great and his empire in the next chapter, in chapter 8. But here, Greece, this kingdom, was given authority to rule. Verse 6. 3 kingdoms. But if those kingdoms weren't awful and terrifying enough, the 4th beast was described as terrifying and frightening and very powerful. If you notice, Daniel, he referred to the other 3 as being like a lion or like a bear or like a leopard. Here he didn't say what it was like, as if he couldn't even make a similarity. He just emphasized how different it was, how violent it was. Verse 7, it had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. Now, I think it's most natural to see that this beast represents the next great kingdom that rose in that area. The Roman Empire took over from the Greeks around the 2nd century before Christ. But when you read down through it, some of the details of this final 4th beast don't quite match up with the Roman Empire. So when Daniel asked more about this kingdom to the man standing beside him, the angel told him, or the man or the angel told him this, that this kingdom will devour the whole earth. It's not just going to be a localized kingdom, it's going to be a worldwide kingdom. He also said that the 10 horns that this beast had are 10 kings that will come from this kingdom. Verse 24. And then this little horn that we read, coming up from among those 10 horns, shows them that after them, another king will arise. Verse 24 again. And this other king will be different from the ones that have gone before. This little horn, it uprooted 3 of the other 10 horns to show that he will subdue 3 kings. But it also is described as having eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And again, this is all symbolic language. So eyes like eyes of a man means that he has great intelligence. But he's got this mouth because he has great arrogance and speaks boastfully. And he will set about attacking both God and God's people in an unprecedented persecution. If you look at verse 25. He will speak against the Most High and oppress His saints and try to change the set times and laws. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. And so because of all of that description of this fourth kingdom, and especially this little horn, this king that will arise out of it, it seems that the Roman Empire, for all of its brutality and all of its violence, is only the start, it's only the beginning of this fourth beast's reign. So perhaps we might need to see that this fourth beast represents all of the other violent and oppressive empires that have come and gone right down through the centuries, as well as all the violent and oppressive empires that are alive today, that are causing all of this destruction that we see around this world today. And then when we think of that final little horn, maybe we need to think about this representing the final great human leader of earth's final kingdom. This one who will rise up sometime in the future. The one that Paul called the man of lawlessness. Or John wrote about him being the Antichrist. Or in Revelation it talks about the beast. Now, of course, Christians disagree over all of the details of this. Okay? If you're confused, don't worry. Join the club. We're all confused, right? Which can be shown by the fact that we all argue our different ideas. So if you have a different understanding of this, let's not fall out about it. Okay? Because none of us can be absolutely 100% sure. But I think there are some principles that we can take from this. When we see all of this, all of these brutal, disgusting, horrible, violent beasts representing all these human empires, it's natural, it's understandable that Daniel was troubled and he was distressed by this vision of evil, of violence, of brutality. It's a picture of what we know has happened in the world all down through the centuries that is happening today in other parts of the world. But there is a little bit of glimmer of hope in all of this, even in this description of these beasts. Did you notice that I think it's clear that these beasts are under somebody else's control? Did you notice that? The lion. Its wings, someone tore the wings off this lion and gave it the heart of a man. Someone told this bear to get up and eat. Someone gave the leopard authority to rule. Someone handed over the saints over to this little horn for a determined time, for time and times and half a time, which I think if you add up is 3.5, so probably 3.5 years. Someone is behind all of this, controlling this. So who is that behind-the-scenes person? Well, they're not named directly in these verses. But I think we can be sure who that is. Because in the middle of all this picture of brutality and violence and evil, Daniel was given a vision of God's throne room. This dream suddenly changes. Look at verse 9. As I looked, thrones were set up in place. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. Suddenly, everything is different. It's a powerful reminder that despite how it might look in this world, despite how it might feel in our lives, our God is sovereign. He is in control. He is on the throne. And look at the vision here of how it describes who this person is. Look at verse 9. First of all, He is the Ancient of Days. He is the Eternal One. These other rulers, like Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar and Darius and all the rest, they come and they go. But our God is from everlasting to everlasting. And secondly, compared with the savage, beast-like antics of earthly kings, our God is perfect in His holiness. It's described as His clothing is white as snow. The hair of His head is white as wool. But that doesn't make Him soft or weak, because our God is also fierce in His power. Verse 9 again, His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. Even those ferocious beasts are no match for our God's supremacy. They're no match for His majesty either. As thousands upon thousands attended Him, 10,000 times 10,000 stood before Him. This is an awe-inspiring sight of the glorious Lord of the universe. But He's also the judge of the world. Look at verse 10. The court was seated, and the books were opened. God has everything recorded. Nothing in this world escapes His sight. He knows what has been going on in this world. He knows what evil men and women have been doing. And one day those records will be opened. And He will call everyone to account. And that includes even this terrifying final beast. Daniel kept watching that little horn that set itself up against God and that waged war against His people. But at the appointed time, verse 11 says, the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. This is God's final and ultimate judgment on him. Verse 26 explains this. His power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. And this is really great news. Because it often appears that evil men and women escape justice in this world. Cruel and violent dictators seem to be able to enjoy their power and their position for far too long. But one day, they will not be able to dominate and oppress and abuse any longer. One day, they will have to stand before God and answer for their sin. One day they will be thrown into the lake of fire forever. But that's not just a comfort for those who suffer under these cruel leaders. Because this is also a warning to all of us. Because God's judgment is not just on dictators and tyrants and war criminals. When John saw this vision of the last judgment in Revelation chapter 20, this is what he wrote. I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. And the books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they found, what was written in the book and recorded in the books. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. God's judgment is coming to all of us, from the least to the greatest. And if we are still in our sin, then we are going to be found guilty in His sight. But there's even better news. Because Daniel then saw, verse 13, one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. This person, as is described in Daniel, he is both described as human, because he's one like a son of man, but also he's described as divine, because he's coming with the clouds of heaven, which in the Bible is always associated with God's coming. But we don't need to wonder, do we, about who this God-man is. Because when the high priest asked Jesus if he was the Christ, the Son of God, listen to what Jesus said. Mark chapter 14. He said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Now the high priest that night concluded that Jesus was guilty of blasphemy for saying this. But we know that Jesus was just telling the truth. He is the one that Daniel saw in his dream. Fully God and fully man. The one who would be given authority, glory, and sovereign power. Jesus is the Son of God who humbled himself and became a human being, who came to serve us and lay down his life for us to pay the price of our sins through his death on the cross, as we've remembered in our time of communion. But today that same Jesus is enthroned in glory. After he provided purification for our sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. And one day he is coming back again. And every eye will see him. And every knee will bow before him. And every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And those who put their trust in him will worship him. As it says in verse 14, all peoples, nations and men of every language worshipped him. But unlike all of these other human leaders, he will reign forever. Look at verse 14 again. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. That's the truth that has been described and declared again and again throughout this book of Daniel. Our King is sovereign. Our King is coming, and our King will reign forever. And that's incredibly wonderful news for all of us who have trusted in Jesus. Because the angel just explained to Daniel that the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Verse 18. Christ, he will forever reign in glory because he is worthy of that honor. But he doesn't want to reign alone. He wants to invite people like us into his kingdom. and to share in that glory forever. The angel declared that once God has judged the nations, the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole earth will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. So there are loads of arguments among scholars and academics about the details of all of this. But I think the principle is absolutely clear. We may go through times of suffering and struggle in this world. But if we put our trust in Jesus as the forgiver of our sins and the leader of our lives, then we do not need to be afraid. We won't lose in the end. Because God, He will rescue His people. And He will establish them to enjoy His kingdom forever. This is what Paul wrote in Romans chapter 8. If we are children of God, then we are heirs. Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. If indeed we share in His sufferings, in order that we also share in His glory. So folks, we may never be woken up, hopefully not, by a snake in our bedroom. But in this world we will have many distressing and troubling situations. We might see brutal rulers come to power, and we might suffer under their cruelty and brutality. It might look that they're winning and that they're getting away with it. But that's not the full picture. Behind it all, God is sovereign. And His judgment is coming. Even on those powerful leaders who seem to be untouchable. And one day His Son, Jesus, is coming back again, and He will reign forever and rescue all who have trusted in Him. So let's not trust in or be discouraged by these human rulers. Let's not panic when we see them rise to power. Instead, let's trust in Jesus so that we will share in His eternal kingdom. However our world looks today, the reality is our God is on the throne.